Big, big, fluffy boy he is becoming. Fluffy eats, this is chocolate, sorry, but Fluffy eats a lot of food, more than chocolate, but chocolate is becoming the bigger cat. And we have had a wonderful time because it's been snowing here for the last 4 or 5 days, very Christmassy and New Year's. And one morning I woke up and walked into a room where the cats sleep, and they were both up on a little chest, and their backs were to me and their heads were up, and here was this big beautiful snowfall, and they were just like two little kids, completely enraptured by the snow that was falling. And so we've all been having a great holiday, and I'm going to put chocolate down, and Fluffy may come around the way he likes to jump up on the bookshelves. Who knows what he'll do. But I also lost my bet on the hope that we were finally going to have that headline around the world, "We're not alone in this universe," never have been. And it hasn't happened quite yet, but I sure had fun at 2 dinners paying off those bets. But I feel like 2019, maybe this really is it. I'll have to place a couple more dinner bets and see. But this whole issue of living on a planet that is going to have a space force to go out and fight something, and we still haven't announced to the world after 5,000-10,000 years that we're not alone in this universe. It's becoming quite absurd, crazy. And I think that a lot of you, like me, I've been getting emails, you're feeling like I am feeling, that there is just more and more news about our solar system and the sun and outer space. It's just coming all the time now. Like we've already made the revolutionary transition to life beyond Earth. You know, space will be a daily part of our headlines, especially if we get a camp on Mars and we get a lunar base that's permanent. We'll be getting news that'll be woven into our terrestrial news from the moon and from Mars. And suddenly it is this feeling like going to the moon and to Mars is now expected. It isn't just hypothetical. It's expected. It's going to happen, and happen soon. Already in the first 2 days and nights of 2019, this new year is breaking open with exciting space news. America's New Horizons spacecraft, right after midnight, January 1st, reached the furthest object ever explored by a machine from Earth out in the Kuiper Belt. Appropriately, it is called Ultima Thule, which means a distant place beyond our known world. It's estimated to be 22 miles tall, 9 miles wide. Its importance to astronomers and cosmologists is that Ultima Thule has probably been in cosmic deep freeze since the beginning of the solar system 4.6 billion years ago. That means it could be a frozen slice, unchanged since gases coalesced into matter bodies. This afternoon, the first images from the New Horizon flyby at 12:33 a.m. Eastern on New Year's early morning were released. And here is one perspective of the peanut-shaped Ultima Thule in black and white. And here is another image that shows in black and white and color the first focused glimpses of the strange object in the Kuiper Belt. This was first discovered 4 years ago. Because the primal body is 4 billion years from Earth, and that's 1 billion miles beyond Pluto, the weak radio signals with scientific data will take 20 months to reach waiting scientists at the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory in Laurel, Maryland. The highest resolution images taken at closest approach are not scheduled to be sent to Earth until next month in February 2019. Alan Stern, PhD, and New Horizons principal investigator from the Southwest Research Institute in Boulder, Colorado, told media after the champagne toasts were made that, quote, Ultima Thule is probably the best time capsule that we've ever had for its understanding, for us understanding the birth of our solar system and the planets in it. Dr. Stern also pointed out that Ultima Thule has a mystery. It does not brighten and dim as most normal spinning bodies in our solar system do. Instead, Ultima Thule's brightness has remained steady the whole time of observations since its discovery 4 years ago in June of 2014. Already, another huge and exciting historic space challenge begins tomorrow, January 3rd, 2019. China has launched its Chang'e 4 spacecraft on December 7, 2018, from the Xichang Satellite Launch Center in China. It's now headed for a landing. It might be even as early as tonight in the United States, but they think for certain tomorrow, on the far side of the moon and all the way to the South Pole, where there is the huge von Karman crater. The von Karman crater, Chinese scientists say, is the flattest spot in the South Pole Aitken Basin. So that's why it's easier to try to land a rover there and explore. The crater is 1,553 miles wide and 8 miles deep. Whatever hit there in the ancient past broke through the outer lunar crust and plunged down into the moon's mantle. If any mantle rocks are exposed, the Chinese scientists want to focus their instruments on them. The Chinese rover will carry a panoramic camera, a radar to probe beneath the lunar surface, an imaging spectrometer to identify minerals, and an experiment to examine the interaction of the solar wind with the lunar surface. Now, it is the tidal forces between the moon and Earth that have caused the moon to orbit the Earth once every 27.322 days. It also takes approximately 27 days for the moon to rotate once on its axis. As a result, the moon does not seem to ever move or spin, but appears to observers on Earth to be keeping almost perfectly still, the same face toward the Earth. And scientists call this synchronous rotation. The far side remains hidden from human eyes. The first photographs of the far side of the moon were on October 7, 1959, when the Soviet probe Luna 3's camera took images. Since then, scientists have learned that the far side of the moon is a very different place than the near side. The front side has all these dark splotches that are scars from ancient volcanic activity. But strangely, there are few signs of volcanoes on the far side of the moon. That's why there aren't many dark patches there amid the many more craters compared to the front side. Now, another space-related story came to me this past week after my December 27th Coast to Coast AM broadcast, when I talked about some real secrets behind the American NASA program in the 1960s to the 1980s. The source of this story is UK engineer, IT analyst, and inventor Winston Keach from North Yorkshire, England. He told me in a recorded interview, quote, "There was definitely a parallel military space program at NASA. It involved a program called MAL, Manned Orbital Laboratory." And so the letters MOL, pronounced MAL by some and MOL by others. It was the very first camera CCD transmissions from an orbiting satellite down to the Earth to spy. And it replaced projects like the U-2. And it did have secret astronauts with secret spacesuits, and their mission was to use an advanced optical lens system like very fine telescopes on manned reconnaissance satellites to spy on the Earth's surface, especially to spy on the Soviet Union. These sophisticated spy lenses included a series called Keyhole, like a keyhole in a door, to look through. They were known as the KH series, Keyhole 9, 10, 11, and 12, all looking down to Earth from orbiting spy satellites. And then someone had the bright idea to turn one of the KH-12s around to look out from the Earth, out into space. And that is how the Hubble telescope was born. The electronic camera system of the KH-12 was so good that a spy satellite looking at Earth could read the writing on a baseball on the ground. Winston Keach told me, quote, "The whole 1980s development of the Star Wars SDI project was because we wanted to see what was coming to Earth from outer space. That's why you would point something like KH-12 Hubble toward the stars and toward the moon and toward Mars to study surface details and to secretly look for alien bases and alien activity," close quote. Well, I got off coast after giving that report at 3 a.m. early Friday morning, December 28th. I was asleep when the phone woke me up. I didn't answer it, but here is the complete call that was preserved in voicemail, beginning with the operator. Film editor Brad Stoddard and I have added some images to what the caller is talking about. Here now.
Next message sent on Friday at 3:25 a.m.
Hi, I was calling on the coast tonight, but I couldn't get through. I mean, I got through, but the phone call didn't get answered. I wanted to inform you about the optical capabilities of the Hubble Space Telescope. They do use that to photograph the moon, and it's done in high definition and in minute detail. They can't do it when the sun is shining on the moon. It has to be done during the new moon, otherwise it'll blow out the cameras. They can also, and have been, photographing the surface of Mars, and the Hubble has, NASA has, and whoever else is using the Hubble. It has the optical capabilities of seeing in minute detail 2 insects on the surface of Mars in minute in high definition, which also means that under the right conditions, they can also view the inner planets like Mercury, Venus, whatever other celestial objects are there, Phobos, Deimos, moons of Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, and anything you want to see out in the Oort cloud. And I thought you'd be interested in that. I think you might already know about the new moon thing, not being able to do that while the sun is shining on the moon. They got to wait for the darkness. That's it. Bye. Oh, one last thing. I hope that this mind control thing with Levine hasn't stopped you from informing us about anything else you might have to say. That would be very good to hear more about him. Thank you. Bye.
End of message.
I am hoping that the caller is listening tonight and that he will try to send me more information in a secure way, and that there's Proton Mail, there's Federal Express, there is hard mail, and an email just to me for information about how to communicate would be really helpful. And to you, the wonderful Earth Files YouTube channel audience, there are so many of you who have such good knowledge professionally about so many different facets in science and medicine and the environment, and I know that from the emails that you send me. And that anybody who is listening who might have more information to follow up this anonymous caller, and the whole idea that something was going on in parallel during the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, there was the NASA public profile, and behind it, there were paralleling secrets. There were secret astronauts. There were secret astronaut suits. And that the idea that we would have a Hubble telescope, according to this caller, that could look at the moon and look at Mars, and as he said, is this possible? I'm trying to find out. Could we see insects on the ground on Mars for real by Hubble or not. Either way, Hubble has been a superb telescope, and the idea that it wouldn't have been used to look at our moon or to look at Mars or Venus or any place else, that wouldn't make any sense. So now is another issue of what is the truth about what our scientists have learned privately and keep as in drawers, in file drawers, because somebody has asked them to, about what we have seen in terms of other intelligent activity on the moon, on other solar system bodies, and now we are way out to the Kuiper Belt. Who knows what will happen next? But these are these moments where in this growing inertia, I hope always going forward, where out there in audiences, whether I'm at a conference, whether I'm in the YouTube channel, whether I am doing Coast or Ancient Aliens or whatever it is, there are people who feel now, like I do, that our world needs to know a lot more truth about what our governments and some scientists have known for a long time. There is an alien presence. It's here, it's on the moon, it's on Mars, it's out beyond, and how far does it go, and what is the agenda or the agendas? I've written 3 big books about that, An Alien Harvest and Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 1 and 2. I've had private communications from people working actively in intelligence agencies who have told me that they have seen my books in very highly classified meetings in Washington, D.C. and other places. So what they are saying is what I have in these books are very relevant to what our government knows and the people and the meetings that they have. So how do we get all of this opened up so that the whole world knows that we're not alone and that there is real facts and realities behind UFO reports, the infrared FLIR reports, the moving of objects point to point, because our government and scientists have discovered that we're dealing with intelligences that know how to move in and out of dimensions. They don't have to travel in Euclidean space. And that all of this, I work hard with the idea that you and I and everyone on the planet, we should get the facts too. We should know what the truth is about our relationship with other intelligences in this universe. And to that end, dear YouTube audience, I hear from several of you by letters and lots of you by emails and occasionally phone calls. I have this really wonderful feeling about you as an audience and the dialogue we have, and I want to show you. Here is the t-shirt that I have mentioned. I think this is the first time I'm wearing it. I held it up before. And that this whole concept having to do with down with entropy, up with light, that popped into my head 15 years ago. And I was sitting in front of the computer and I thought, I want to do a t-shirt about down with entropy, the down where energy winds down and it goes to death and hate and war and zero. And I want to counter it. That's up with light. I want to be in a planet. I want to be in a solar system, a galaxy, a universe. Up with light, down with entropy. And that's the picture behind this. And then on the back, I think I can do this. If I stand up really carefully, and I know I've got my mic on, and I'll keep my mic. On the back, Brad, does that show? That is a mathematical graphic of what entropy is about. where all the rivulets come down to what? They keep everything that you're talking about, energy, everything is winding down to zero. But inside of the graphic, I have my name and earth files, and they are moving up, away from the end, away from entropy being extinction. That's what all those little green going up are inside. And am I okay now? So I hope that as we go forward into 2019, I'm going to be doing a lot of conferences. I'm going to try to have these at Conscious Life Expo in San Francisco, and to others. One of the big ones, Alien Con in Los Angeles. That is going to be something. And so go to the Earth Files Conferences and Appearances list. It's on the right when you go to Earth Files and click open, and you'll see all of the different places where I'm going to be, and that Lori and others will be with me sometimes, and I'm going to try to get more of these shirts, even glow in the dark in the next round, so that all of us who feel the same way, up with light, down with entropy. We can't just let everything die because we are at a crucial time and the weather systems of the planet might become more violent because there's more CO2 and methane. But there are so many humans now that are trying really hard to come up with ways to counter it. And that is the thing I'm beginning to feel out of the chaos and the feeling that 2009 is going to be or 2019 is going to be just a tumultuous year. More projections of more earthquakes and more tsunamis and more volcanoes. So the earth coming more and more agitated, while political uncertainties are there. That if we all hang on to that, up with light, down with entropy. We don't have to just accept things falling apart because sometimes it seems that that is what is destined. So join me, like my shirts, join me in that mantra, down with entropy, up with light. And now Fluffy is jumped up. Maybe he'll come over and I can hold him up. In fact, Brad, hand Fluffy to me, because I started with chocolate and I want everybody to see what a big, beautiful boy Fluffy is now. He is absolutely one of the most loving animals I have ever been around. And he is a clown. He is a character. I've told you how he will run and jump up on high things so that he can pounce down onto the back of chocolate. And then they go rolling across the floor in this big blur of fur, instigated by this guy. And then they end up licking each other and loving each other. And I think, oh, if the world could just have fun and be kind. Now, on that note, Lori, I would like to see what questions and comments we have tonight.
Okay, so here is our first one, and we've got two questions for you tonight. The first one is, what's your take on the Con Edison incident when the sky was flickering like a faulty light bulb?
You know, that is a true mystery, and I don't know. I'm puzzled by that as well. Anybody listening who may have any insights, please let us know. Let Lori know in the chat now. That is one of the wonderful ways for feedback. I know that there have been a lot of boom reports in Indiana, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Phoenix, just in the last 2 weeks. And I've been reporting about some. I'm going to be doing another. I talked with a reporter who was in Indiana, and it is where there's lots of people calling, and they're hearing it just like what's happened in Pennsylvania and Arizona. One loud boom or one loud, some people say it's like something crashing, but no follow-up. The police and Homeland Security and everybody, they can't find anything. It's the same phenomenon that I've been reporting around the world since 2011. And I bring it up because this is a phenomenon that doesn't go away. It comes in cycles. The police are baffled. In all of these recent cases, the USGS, no seismic activity. Well, what would be making booms? And would anything that would make the atmosphere flicker, could they possibly be related? And maybe a new facet of something is emerging. I do not know. But it would be interesting to find out where exactly, in relationship to all these booms that have been happening, how many miles and what the vectors are. And I would love to know if any of you out there, even totally confidentially, if you want to communicate, if you have any information about any of that phenomena, get in touch with me. And if somebody has something that they can talk to me about where I can record them, I don't have to use your name or your location. So always remember that. You can talk to me so that I can use an eyewitness account or an ear witness account in public, but I don't have to identify you. So we'll leave this as one of those mysteries out there that we need help. We need feedback.
And your last question tonight is, Craig would like more information about the Alaskan underground Black 600-foot pyramid. Do you have anything new?
Well, I have a lot of people asking me the same question. And what we need is the exact latitude and longitude from somebody who was in the military, who might have worked on the DEW line projects, who might have been told at the time that this was confidential for 25 or 30 years. Maybe they had to sign a non-disclosure agreement. But this is now 2019. A lot of those non-disclosure agreements have expired. And if anybody has information specifically about the latitude and the longitude of where a big, huge pyramid was found underground by our government in the 1950s especially, and you can get that to me, then with a latitude and longitude, we could put some money into very specific investigations if we were not blocked by some governmental agency or rule. We don't know that until we try. And for those of you who have been following my work for the last 20 years on earthfiles.com, you will know that I started doing a whole series of these reports in the 2010, 11, 12 period. And that I did pay a photographer, I paid a helicopter firm. We went to an area that the retired Navy captain thought might be because of a discoloration that seemed to form a perfect square. And the thing that was interesting is that even though we didn't have the right latitude, longitude, and we were going by a Google map analysis, and the Google map had this strange greener square, and that's where the helicopter, originally our agreement was the helicopter would come and set down, try to set down right in the middle of the green square. That's what I hoped, so we could see all around and that they would be photographing as the helicopter went down. As the helicopter pilot got close enough to the ground, trying to carry out those instructions, they saw water, a lot of water. And I got a phone call in my office from the pilot saying, "Linda, we can't set down, we can't land, it's filled with water. We didn't know this would be filled with water." So they flew off 2 miles, I believe it was, away. And they could set the helicopter down, and it was next to a creek. And nobody knew this creek was even there. It wasn't on any of the maps that they had with them in the helicopter at that moment. So they called back to the office and said, we don't know what this creek is that is not too far from where we tried to set down. And in that office, they had old USGS maps that went way, way back. And there was a body of water and a creek, and they were told, and told me on the phone, that the name of that creek was High Power. It turned out I did a lot of research and found out that the High Power Creek had been labeled by somebody who had worked for the United States Geological Service. Back, I believe it was at the end of the 40s or the early 50s. And in talking with people in an office, nobody knew why was the name High Power put on that creek. And the helicopter pilot said, Linda, do you think it could have something to do with the fact that you have witnesses who say that there's a big pyramid somewhere around there, and that it generates enough power that it could generate power to keep Canada going, was the reported story from a military source. Maybe, cyclically, who knows, maybe there was a measurement of something that was called high power coming out of this region, and that's how the creek got the name. We still don't know to this day. It is truly a mystery. But there have been other sources who didn't know specifically about the big dark pyramid 550 feet high under the ground west of Mount McKinley, now known as Mount Denali, but have told me they know that our government has discovered other pyramids under the ground that have not been publicized. So this comes back to this hypothesis that if there's the dark pyramid in Alaska where it is, and then we could lift off the surface of the earth and look at everything that was between 1 foot below the surface down to 1,000 feet, how many pyramids, maybe all made out of a dark composite material, as I've been told, that doesn't exist on this earth, but here are these pyramids, and that there is a grid pattern literally beneath the surface of the earth, and that the grid pattern of the underground pyramids relates to the surface pyramids around the earth, setting up resonant frequencies like notes on a piano. And if you know how to play them, you will have perpetual energy, perpetual communication, not needing electrical power. And that is so intriguing with these various, we'll say, testimonies, some based on what appears to have been military knowledge and others from other knowledge, that is why I'm provoked enough to keep repeating, if anybody has any information about a latitude and longitude of a dark pyramid found 60 miles west of what was Mount McKinley and today is renamed Mount Denali. That is supposed to be the general area 60 miles west in Alaska. So if, while I've been speaking, Lori, if there are any more other questions, I think we've got plenty of time to go into other questions.
We do have one question, but there was a comment that I thought you would really enjoy. My dad used to download and record your Earth files and send them to me so I could read and listen to you when I was in the military.
Oh, I am so glad to hear that. I have really, really tried to go after fact that could open up suppressed truths, and it is hard. And so to know that there are people who have served in the military, and I do get a lot of correspondence from people who are in universities and government, who say that they know that what I'm trying to do on Earth Files, weaving science, medicine, and the environment with the real X-Files that are supposed to be about the subjects that are verboten, God help you if you bring up UFOs and ETs in a university. But it's changing. And so this comment means a lot to me, because I think that there are a lot of scientists, a lot of medical people, a lot of people in our government, and they have their own firsthand experiences. An example, Jim Semivan, who is on the board of directors for To the Stars, worked for the CIA for more than 2 decades. He and his wife, they had an abduction experience that he wrote about in a book that Jim Semivan wrote. And he now acknowledges. He worked for the CIA, he's now working with To the Stars, and he and his wife had an abduction experience, and it haunts them to this day. And that's where I think we have the strength and the ability to help each other the most. It's when we would have a climate on this planet where Jim Semivan and scientists and you and everyone would be able to freely be able to report what really happens in the dark of the night, in a bedroom, in a living room, in a backyard, in a car, and be able to talk with people who have knowledge and not be afraid of being criticized or condemned, because the abduction syndrome is real, and there's lots of facets of this phenomena that if we could all talk with each other without fear of condemnation or ridicule, who knows, being able to talk might begin to weaken the reason for whatever this is, that why it's done, and maybe there would be less abductions, and maybe we would start moving toward face-to-face communication with something that clearly is advanced, and that would be wonderful to see that occur. So thank you, Lori, for sharing that comment.
And as a question, I have, Linda, as a journalist, what do you think about Corbell causing Bob Lazar's FBI raid during the filming of the Corbell documentary? It upset me.
Well, this is after the fact of John Burroughs and I did a long, in-depth interview with Jeremy Corbell for Phenomenon Radio. John Burroughs and I watched Jeremy Corbell's Skinwalker documentary. And at that period of time, when I was focusing so much on what Jeremy was reporting publicly, there wasn't anything about some negative impact on Bob Lazar through the FBI. So since I don't understand the details, and I don't know why we weren't really aware of that when we did Phenomena Radio about 3 months ago, what I'd like to say is I knew Bob Lazar from about 1987, 88 onward. John Lear, Bob Lazar, Bill Cooper. There was a whole bunch of people who were very interested in Area 51 then. And that was the time period when John Lear wanted to get up on a high place to look down into Area 51 based on information he was getting from Bob Lazar. Now, Bob and I talked a great deal in depth about what he remembered from being taken, the way he described it to me, 3 times, and checks from the Navy through EG&G. There were 3 checks that went to Bob Lazar as payment. It was a short period of time, so it was a short working assignment, but Bob was kept and contained in an area underneath one of the craft that he has described as the sports model. And that's where he was introduced to the concept of an element 115 that could be handled, picked up
in the hands and was involved in a propulsion system in this craft. Well, in the last couple of years or so, element 115 has been confirmed, but not in any solid form that you could pick up with your hands. When you go back to what Bob told me and a couple of other of us personally, he never claimed that he ever went to MIT and got a degree of which he had been attacked. His explanation was he was an adopted child, so his parents that he grew up with had adopted him. He never has known who his parents were. His adoptee parents didn't have much money. He was in Florida, and a lot of his friends in high school, they were nerds. They loved electricity. They loved taking machines apart. That was the group that Bob Lazar ran with in high school. And they ended up going off to MIT and Columbia and Harvard and so forth. And you can imagine somebody that you're in high school and you're having all this fun working on building machines and doing all of that, and then they go away. And so Bob said that he decided that he could drive up to see his good friends at MIT and some other places and sit in on classes and see what he was missing. And that was what was behind a statement that he apparently had made, and then it got picked up as if he said, I got a degree at MIT. I believe Bob Lazar. I remember him telling me this. He said, I never said to anybody I got a degree. I went up and sat in on classes with my buddies from high school, and I wanted to see what it would be like to be in a physics course with them and electrical and the various courses that his buddies from high school were in college. And that is Bob Lazar's explanation. Well, unfortunately, the MIT, I got a degree, that somehow seemed to stick out there. And so he really got attacked for something that he said he never said, and I believe that he never said it because he explained so well why he went up and drove up to these schools. But we did find that there was, I believe it was a mail address book, and that Bob Lazar was working for a brief period of time at Los Alamos, probably in a technician role, and that is where he would have had the opportunity to speak to Edward Teller, who was the head of the Star Wars program for Ronald Reagan. And Bob, once you know Bob Lazar, the way he was in the 80s and 90s, a smart guy, he wanted to know what the truth was about Area 51 and UFOs and ETs. Any of us who knew Bob could imagine him walking up to somebody like Edward Teller at Los Alamos and saying, Sir, my name is Bob Lazar. I am doing electrical work. I would very much like to know if I could get an assignment at Area 51. I would like to work there. I would like to understand if there's truth about UFOs and ETs. And Bob says that was the kind of discussion, and that Edward Teller said something like, I'll see what can be done, and that was how he got the EG&G. EG&G was the contractor through which Bob Lazar got into the Area 51 and underground and the UFO and the element 115 and the whole story there. So, unfortunately, he ended up, I believe, being the target of intimidation by a phony suit by the police, saying that he was working for prostitutes, a house of prostitution in Nevada, and it became an embarrassing thing as opposed to he was doing software for a computer that was used in a legal house of prostitution in the state of Nevada. And that shows you how the false story is the one that ends up doing the credibility harm. Behind the false story that people ran with was the real story, that Bob was a computer geek doing computer software for an accounting system for a house of prostitution that was in a legal part of Nevada and had been there for a very long time. And there was nothing wrong, but it was the impression that was given that Bob Lazar had lied about going to MIT. The impression that Bob Lazar was guilty of some sort of crime working for a house of prostitution. And those are the ways, 1,000 cuts, that the government has often attacked the credibility of people who, in Bob Lazar's case, I've never doubted that what he told me, George Knapp, John Lear, and others was the truth. So Jeremy Corbell, I know, is just a great, great supporter of Bob Lazar, and so I do not know exactly what happened around that production. If I find out anything, I will be glad to bring it and report it here on another Earth Files YouTube channel. I'll probably be seeing Jeremy and George Knapp and others as we get into the spring, and I'll try to find out more and then talk to you here. But for those who have questions at all because of the historic efforts to discredit Bob Lazar, anything that he's written, drawn, talked about in video having to do with what happened back in the end of, like around winter of 88 to spring of 89, I believe, you should pay serious attention, because he was really exposed to at least scientific investigation of material and technology that was not identified as being from this planet. And I believe Bob when he says that. So, Laurie, is there another question?
All right, last one. You ready?
Okay.
What can Linda tell us tonight that she has never said before?
Wow. Well, I think I talked about this on the YouTube channel, but it may be worth repeating because there are different audiences, and it goes to the heart of all of these questions and anxieties. If you encounter something that is clearly a craft that is not comprehensible, or a being that is communicating with you only telepathically, and you become afraid to tell anybody because you're afraid that you will be ridiculed, I sort of understand because of something that I experienced in Colorado. And here is the thing to emphasize, is that I feel now very comfortable to tell you this, when back in 1986, when it occurred, I didn't want to talk to anybody about it. And only one person who was investigating for a journal that I knew on the West Coast, and knew that he knew everything there was about all kinds of advanced aerial technology. He's who I called. And I said, at that time, in 1986, this was 7 years after I had done A Strange Harvest, and I was being exposed to hundreds and hundreds of eyewitness reports about beams of light lifting up animals and lowering them, and all sorts of craft and sheriffs that were dealing with UFOs and big balls of light that would go into the ground, all of that. So when this that I'm going to tell you now tonight happened, I didn't want to tell anybody. And I didn't for a very long time. It started at a bank in Aurora, Colorado, which is a suburb of Denver. And it had been an afternoon meeting about a television project. At that time, I was not working for the CBS station. I had left to go work for a home box office, and then the government put a wall up against me working on the HBO project, and I had found myself going on to do all kinds of independent projects, and that's why I was having a meeting in this bank in a conference room with people about a specific film that would have been a documentary. And when I left the meeting, I remember this very precisely, it was winter, and it was about 6 o'clock, and in Denver at 6 o'clock in like the end of December, there'll be an inky orchid sky, and the mountains will truly look like a silhouette profile against them with that orchid. And that's what it looked like as I came out of the bank. And I remember looking at this beautiful, breathtaking scene, so pure, so clean, just beautiful silhouetted mountains and this kind of breathtaking orchid-colored sky with the inky dark sky above, the way it can be in the western Rocky Mountains. And that was what I was thinking. Oh, it's so beautiful. That's all was in my mind. But I'm walking, and I'm walking into the parking lot, and my car is probably about 100 feet from where I came out of the front door. And at that time, I had a big black it was a leather briefcase, and it was slung over my shoulder, and it came down, so it kind of went from my waist down, was the briefcase part on this long strap. And that was hanging on my right shoulder as I'm walking in between cars. And then I just spun. It wasn't like I heard anything. It was like, I'm going this direction. And I spun so hard that that briefcase flung out from my shoulder and hit a car. And I remember that, the impact of my briefcase hitting a car as I turn around 180 degrees, and now I'm looking straight up. So I've gone from here to here, I'm looking straight up. And I could not see any stars. What was above me was so large that if I did like this, it wouldn't have, and if I did this, that's 180 degrees, so you have to have something that would cut it off. It was huge. It was so low that I could see details that I'm going to describe to you, and realizing that my mind was trying very hard to place what I'm looking at in some category that it recognized, that I actually knew, could feel. My mind was doing that, and it was incomprehensible to my mind. And it was moving. But it was moving so slowly, just like that. I think I remember telling the aerospace guy in California, it was like it was not moving more than 3 to 4 miles an hour, but it took up the whole sky above me. And I remember one of my first thoughts, how could anything this big be this low and be moving? And it was completely silent. It was like I was in a zone of silence. There was no sound from anywhere. And at 6 o'clock, you would have thought that the parking lot would be filled with people. Nothing. No cars, no people, just me standing there, staring up at this huge thing. And I'm here, so where I'm looking at it, I remember saying, make this mental note, which I'll do to myself sometimes when I don't have a paper and pen. Make this mental note. It looks like a 5-story hotel against a 5-story hotel. And I said that to myself, as if I was seeing 5 layers, like you would see 5 balconies, but it was like 2 5-story buildings coming together at a kind of not exactly a point, rounded like a boomerang. And the shape was a boomerang. Now, I knew then about the Hudson Valley UFOs that were being described as huge boomerangs, completely silent, huge, and they have been going up and down the Hudson Valley. And J. Allen Hynek worked on a book about the East Coast boomerang sightings. So I'm thinking, this is what people have been describing in New York. And on the 5 layers that were coming into the boomerang, if I said that I was looking at a whole bunch of 3-dimensional structures, but they didn't fit into any category. They weren't like a circle, they weren't like a diamond, they weren't like a cube, they weren't like a pentagram or 5, like a pentagon, but they were shapes like geometric shapes. And that was the other weird part. What am I looking at? Because my mind can't get a category for what these structures are. And then I realized I'm seeing all of these structures on these 5 layers that are coming to the front of the boomerang and coming back because of light that is reflected from this big bank. There was not a single light on the craft, but I was seeing all these details. And here's the final kicker. The ends of this boomerang ended up, if anybody knows what quartz crystals look like, I used to collect them when I was 4, 5, 6 years old. I had huge collections of quartz crystals, so I know exactly, and my mind said, the ends of these boomerangs, it looks just like quartz crystals, but not the crystal itself, not translucent crystal. It's the shape of the crystals, whatever it was made out of, that looked sort of gray, black, brown, like metal, like everything was made, all these shapes were made out of metal, the end, but it was faceted just like a quartz crystal on both sides. And as soon as I got home, I sat down and I tried to sketch it, which is what I try to encourage everybody that I interview and others. When you see something, if you haven't got a photograph, try to sketch it immediately while it's still fresh in your memory. So I had that, and I called up my friend who knew everything about advanced aerospace, and I described it. I said, what have I just seen? And he said, well, it's not an aurora, it's not a bomber, it's not, and he went through a bunch of things. He said, there's nothing that I know that exists on this planet that if you're saying that you thought that it was maybe a couple 100 feet above you and it's blocking out the entire sky and you can't hear a sound, Linda, depending upon the altitude, this could be something that's a mile in diameter, and he went through all of these. And he said, and as far as I know from everything that I study and report, there isn't a nation on planet Earth that has the ability to construct anything in thousands of feet, have it move 3 to 5 miles an hour, 2 or 300 feet above the ground, and make no sound, or do any of the above in any piece. And that came from somebody who knew everything and was reporting everything at the edge of aerospace. Now today, in 2019, maybe this is a sign and signal of our growth. that story that I didn't want to tell anybody, because back in 1986, I felt vulnerable. I was fighting so hard to sustain my credibility as a professional journalist because I was investigating animal mutilations, another hot button. Not only was I investigating animal mutilations, but it was law enforcement themselves who said the perpetrators are creatures from outer space. A total hot button for any kind of public discussion. And then there were people who said and described the non-humans that were doing mutilations in pastures. That was another hot button. So for me to say in 1986 and go to anybody or do any kind of an interview or say anything about what I've just told you, I didn't want to do it. And didn't. But on January 2nd, 2019, at the beginning of what feels like it's going to be a tumultuous year, and we may finally get that headline, "We're not alone in this universe." I am glad to share this with you, and I hope if anybody listening tonight has had any similar experience with any of these huge, silent, strange boomerangs, that you'll send me an email, and it would be very interesting to know if anybody in the audiences today ever saw any of these vehicles that, for some reason, were focused on New York in the Hudson Valley for so long, but I saw it over a bank parking lot in Aurora, Colorado, in, I think it was November to December of 1986. And I've never forgotten it. And that's the part you and we can share. Every one of us has had indelible experiences that haunt us. We need to cross the barrier. Politically, socially, families, all of us around the world. We need to cross the barrier of worrying if we tell the truth that we will be made fun of. That has to end. And I hope this is the year that that headline will make it forevermore acceptable for people to tell what they are actually seeing and experiencing. That's in the unexplained, and quite often in what our own government has used this phrase going back at least to John F. Kennedy. We're on a planet that has an alien presence. And we all deserve to know what that alien presence is, what its agendas are, and how we as humans can begin to become stronger and perhaps less warlike if we knew that juxtaposed on our own planet and in our own solar system, and definitely throughout the Milky Way galaxy, are other humanoids that may look just like us. They probably made us, and we need to shake hands with them. And on that note, tonight, Lori, I will say Happy New Year again, and that I look forward to being with you guys next Wednesday, and soon Brad and I are going to have something very interesting to start unfolding piece by piece on my Wednesday night YouTube channels that relates to some of the work that I have been doing for the last 3 years with whistleblowers. So that's to come. Thank you, and thank you, Lori.